There is one back training mistake that reigns supreme over all the other mistakes. I've literally seen every single person in the gym do this at some point, and today I'm going to tell you what it is and how to clear it up. And this is going to be something that doesn't just apply to one back movement or another, it's going to apply to all rows and all pull downs that you do. So first of all, I just want to present it almost as a question to you first. If I put both of these videos up on the screen, do any of you notice a difference between the videos? Does anything stick out to you? Because in one of these videos, the mistake is being made, and in the other, the mistake is not being made. So if you guessed this video as the one with the mistake, you'd be correct. And maybe you know why intuitively, maybe you don't. If you thought to yourself, well, it kind of looks like Ben is pulling with his hands or his arms in that one, you'd be correct. And this is the primary reason why so many people feel their arms, their biceps, their forearms, instead of their lats, instead of their upper back, instead of the things that they want to be feeling when they're trying to train the back. But when you look at this video of me making the mistake and you just say something like, oh, well, you know, Ben is pulling with his arms and therefore that's the mistake. That's nice and it might be technically correct, but why is it that that's such a problem, and how do we actually understand this on a principled level? All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the correct version here as an example of what to do, and then I wanna make a sort of stark contrast to the one with the mistake. And the primary thing you're gonna notice here throughout the entire range of motion is that at pretty much every point throughout the range, this line, which is representing the cable, i.e. the resistance, is pretty much always parallel to my forearm. So if you watch my forearm and if you watch this cable, and I'm just gonna kind of let this play, watch the relationship between the cable and my forearm. Even as I'm getting into these partial reps toward the end of a set, that cable is pretty much tracking directly with that same relationship as it was right from the get-go the entire time. And what that means, essentially, is that when I pull, no matter where I am in the range of motion, that resistance is interacting with my hand roughly with a direction like this. Okay, I'm just gonna draw this arrow super thick. And to understand the relationship between the resistance and our muscles, we need to talk about how this resistance relates to our joints. And the only way we can do that is if I track this arrow back, just pretend this whole thing is straight. And I want you all to notice basically how this arrow is pretty much directly on top of the elbow joint. In the same way that if you're at the top of a chest press, the weight will stack over the elbow, and so it's really easy. It's easy to hold in that position. This is almost like the reverse of that. So the resistance is going from my hand through the cable that way. Again, just pretend it's straight. And it's sort of going directly backward through the elbow. Again, almost like it's stabbing right through the joint. And when the resistance stabs right through the joint that way, again, it's really close to the elbow, which means there's pretty much no resistance on it. But if you look at my shoulder, look how long this line is. It's a humongous line, which basically means that the stuff in the shoulder that we want loaded, like the lats in this case, it has all of the resistance and all of the torque on it. But when we contrast that to me making the mistake, what you will notice is that when I get back into this position here, is that this relationship of the forearm, unlike what we just looked at, is now not parallel, right? So this would be parallel over here. I don't know, somewhere like 45 degrees off of parallel. And so what does that actually mean? Well, if the resistance is going this way and we just track it directly backward like we did before, look at this line to the shoulder and now look at this line to the elbow, right? So whereas before that line was basically directly stacked on top of the elbow, again, the resistance in the other case was basically going like this. It was going right through this joint here, and it had all that distance to the shoulder. Now, all of a sudden, what we've done is we've pulled in such a way where the resistance is going to track backward, and it's going to be this far from the shoulder and this far from the elbow. So this line right here, this bottom red line that I'm drawing all these arrows to, that is the line that basically tells our body and our joints, ooh, Ben, muscles of the elbow need to respond, right? This brachioradialis muscle needs to bend the elbow. These biceps muscles need to bend the elbow. The brachialis muscle that sits underneath of the biceps need to bend the elbow. And so basically what you're doing is you're taking load away from the shoulder and from the lats and the rear delts and the traps and the muscles you're trying to train with this pulling motion, and you're placing it on all these muscles I just mentioned. Now, some of you might not think that's a bad thing if that's part of your goal and you want to blend these motions. That's totally fine, but if your goal is to isolate your back, to grow your back, and you're choosing exercises specifically for that goal, you want to maintain that parallel relationship. And so throughout the whole range of motion, what you should be thinking of, specifically in the context of a row like this, is to keep that forearm parallel. But to do that, what you almost want to imagine is, in this context, pulling like you are pulling with your elbow, through your elbow, and not through your hand. When you pull with your hand, there's this tendency to kind of yank toward your hands toward your shoulders. So almost pretend that like your hands are hooks onto whatever implement you're grabbing, and ultimately you are leading the way with the elbow. Because if you kind of loosen your grip, and you almost, again, pretend that your hands are hooks, there's gonna be no way for you to elbow flex or elbow bend it upward as you're trying to do the row. And if you're using a neutral grip like I am and your goal is to do a lat focused row, you can almost pretend that you're kind of pulling the elbow downward and backward. And again, maintaining that loose hook-like grip on the bar will allow you to maintain and create this parallel relationship between the forearm and the cable. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this doesn't just apply to rows, and specifically narrow rows in the context we looked at it. It applies to any kind of row or any kind of pull down. You just need to look at what is the relationship between the forearm and the load. If the forearm is parallel to the direction of the load, then you are thumbs up in a good position to avoid this mistake. If there is a non-parallel relationship between the forearm and the load, then guess what? By definition, your elbow and elbow muscles are going to be more loaded. And so one of the coolest parts about this is if you look at any other back-related motion, because you now understand this principle of forearm to resistance, you can understand whether or not you're making this mistake in other contexts. So here I am doing a vertical pull down. Let's look at this relationship between my forearm and the load, right? So if, for instance, my hand, instead of being somewhere here, my hand were actually, I don't know, over here, and my forearm were kind of like this, at this bent angle, well then this would be the resistance. And now look at this relationship, this non-parallel relationship, which again, in simple terms, you could just think of as like, if you're pulling your hand actively toward your shoulder, then muscles that will move this bone to this bone are going to have to contribute. So again, in something like a pull down, as I'm showing here, I like to imagine leading with the elbow downward toward the floor throughout the entire range of motion. Now, where people tend to screw this up the most is not just on the concentric, on the shortening, but on the eccentric. So let's imagine that you feel really good about the pulling portion, but then as you load into the stretch, what will happen is a lot of times people's hands will drift this way and their elbows will start to drift forward. And again, that's just another way of them trying to use elbow muscles to assist. So even as this load is coming upward, you need to try to think about maintaining this parallel relationship between the forearm and the cable. And in order to do that, what you can just think about is still driving the elbow down and almost away from you as you come up. That's a little bit of a weird concept, but if you think about what is happening to this bone on the way up, this bone actually needs to pivot kind of forward and upward. So if I let this play now, just watch my elbow and watch what it does, right? So my elbow, it goes up and forward, it goes down away from me and then back, up and forward, all the way up to the top, down, and then sort of a little bit back toward me, and then it goes away from me again, right? So that whole time you're just thinking about maintaining that parallel relationship. So if you're ever feeling your arms too much in pulling motions, and that's preventing you from really making any of the muscles in your back a rate limiter, just remember that simple takeaway of forearm parallel to load. Whether it's a cable, a dumbbell, a machine, it doesn't matter, forearm parallel to load. And again, a simple way or a simple cue to work yourself through using that concept in your training is to think about pulling with your elbow, not just in the downward shortening portion in the case of a pull down, but also the raising, lowering portion throughout any exercise, whether that be a row, a pull down, or something in between. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and you want to learn more from me, check the links in the description, and I'll see you all in the next video.